Okay, guys, welcome back to another week. This is my dear friend, Dan Wions. Dan and I actually met playing together in the South Florida Symphony Orchestra many, many years ago. And since then, Dan has moved up in the music world. He is what most would call a professional musician. So, Dan, why don't you give us your little quick bio?
My quick bio. Oh man. Well, I grew up in central New Jersey in Hillsborough Township, and I was in high school band there. Well, elementary, middle school, and high school band there, and I did marching band, which I did not like. um, but yeah, it was a pretty good band program. And then I went to college in the Midwest at Indiana University, where I really loved it, and came back here, freelanced for a while, and figured out how to win some auditions and won some regional things. I was principal horn of some pops orchestras and a ballet orchestra in Philadelphia. And then most recently, I won a job in an opera festival in upstate New York. And about a year ago, I won my current position. Oh my God, my phone is making so many noises. My current position as principal horn of New York City Ballet.
Yes, so Dan is a French horn player. Most of us, let me just look through our list. Most of us are string players. We might have a couple of wind players in here, sneakishly snuck in. I just don't know where, and I don't
Am I in the
know their
right Zoom chat?
names. Perhaps. But this Zoom chat's all about what it takes to become a professional musician, and that's
Uh,
you. But as everybody knows, because they've sat through many of these with me so far, uh, these interviews are not only informational, but a lot of fun. And we have lots of fun questions for you. So, would you rather start with a music question or a fun question?
oh, fun question, of course.
Okay. So, because everybody's waiting for this, this is why they tuned in, just so you know, Dan. They're waiting for you to answer the most important question, which is if you found a penguin in your freezer, what would you do with it?
Where's the leave button? If I found a penguin in my freezer, wow, what would I do with it or how would I react?
Yes, either or.
Okay. Well, considering the third floor of my house does not air condition as well as the first floor. So if I had a frozen penguin, I would probably bring the frozen penguin up to the third floor to thaw it out and to cool my third floor. And then um, I would likely come to your place, bring you a frozen penguin so that I could hear you make many, many high pitched noises.
I'm honored you would share your frozen penguin with me. Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, on to the real questions.
Real questions. Oh, I was just getting warmed up.
Why French horn?
Well, this is a funny story. So my first instrument was piano, and I was playing piano since I could reach the keys. I started by ear, and so piano came very naturally. And when at the end of fourth grade, the band directors in elementary school sent out a survey to all of the people who had expressed an interest in being in band the next year. And so on that survey, you had 3 slots to tell them your top 3 choices for what instrument you wanted to play. So one of the band directors lived close to me, so I called her up and asked if I could just play piano. And she laughed at me and she said, "No, no, no. This is a wind band. We don't do that." And so at that time, it was really important to me to be a cool kid. So at the time, the cool kids played drums or saxophone because that's cool. So I, for those of you who don't play drums or saxophone, don't worry, your instruments are also cool. But I was, I couldn't think beyond those 2 instruments, and there was a third choice that I had to put. Now, my mom was at the time a choir director, a middle school choir director. And when she was going to music school, she went to Rutgers, which at the time, the school she went to was Douglas. They didn't have a main music school yet. Um, and she had to take a brass pedagogy class, a class just about the general education of brass instruments. And during that time, she played the French horn. So she said, well, at the time I was known as Danny. So she said, Danny, you should put the French horn. And I'm like, no, no, that's not a cool kid instrument. She said, but it's got a beautiful sound and it's just, you get to play so many interesting things. And I responded with, and I get to take it on the bus and look like a moron because it's so big. And she said, okay, but it's also the hardest instrument. And she knew her son. I was very competitive. And so I put it as my last choice, thinking, the band directors are not going to be jerks. They're not going to be mean and give me my last choice. But meanwhile, they see French horn anywhere on that list and they start throwing parties and setting off fireworks and jumping up and down and screaming very loudly, kind of like that. Um, and yeah, so they gave me French horn and I hated it. I really hated it. I didn't like lugging it on the bus. I didn't practice. Lucky for me, French horn parts at the time, because horn is such a hard instrument, the parts were very easy to play, and I had a good enough ear that I could kind of get by a little bit without practicing. And then I had some early success and realized, oh, I think I actually like this thing. And then I had an early failure, and that was what set me off. And I've been working hard ever since.
Why not a string instrument like most of us?
Well, I always say if I didn't play horn, cello is one of the top instruments that I would have preferred. Um, and in many ways, the way I play horn, the way I approach horn, I'm very inspired by really good cellists. But at the time, there was no string program in Hillsborough, so it wasn't really an option for me. It wouldn't have been until later on when I started doing local youth orchestras. But in elementary school or middle school, there just wasn't there wasn't a system in place for that, so I didn't have access.
Nice. So right now, I don't know if some of us are coming in a little bit late, but oh, that's Story. Um, we have our French horn player, New York City Ballet, and I don't know, has anybody ever been, show of hands, been to Lincoln Center in New York City? All right, so we got a couple hands. All right, so he is on the left side if you guys are looking at Lincoln Center. He's at one of those three buildings. So at Lincoln Center, you have the New York Phil, you have the Met Opera, and then you have New York City Ballet. And so that's where Dan is. Now, Dan, I know that you also played at the Pennsylvania Ballet. Is that what
Yeah,
it's called?
yeah. I always tell people the ballet in Philadelphia because Pennsylvania is a big state and they don't assume. But yeah, it's called the Pennsylvania Ballet, and it's in Philadelphia, where the Philadelphia Orchestra used to play. It's called the Academy of Music.
So why ballet? Like, why ballet music? What drew you to that specifically?
You know, um, I mean, when I won, when you look at my resume and my trajectory, it kind of does look like I targeted ballet orchestras, but it was a total fluke. Um, when I won Pennsylvania Ballet, so there are two stories here. First was the whole audition trajectory thing. When I won Pennsylvania Ballet, I knew very little about ballet. The only ballet I had ever played was the Nutcracker, which most of us at some point get to play at least excerpts from. And so at that time, I was really just passionate about getting a job. It didn't matter what kind of orchestra it was, just something that would further my clout, get me the connections I needed to get more and more interesting work. Um, but the really exciting thing for me, when I was in high school and I first started getting serious about horn, someone gifted me a CD. For those of you who don't know what a CD is, because you are less than half my age, there used to be these little round discs that would go in a little drawer, and you'd press a button and press play, and then it would play music. It was like the most mind-blowing thing. But now you just click a button on a computer or an iPod or something, or iPad or phone. Anyway, I'm dating myself. So in any case, someone gifted me a CD that was called The Greatest Hits of the French Horn. And I thought this was like the nerdiest thing ever, but I listened to it anyway. And on that CD, one of my favorite things on that CD was the nocturne movement from Mendelssohn's Midsummer Night's Dream. And to this day, it's still one of the most beautiful things I've ever heard when done well. And the whole movement is basically one long horn solo, and it's just like, I viewed it as the direct access to a horn player's soul. It was just so expressive, so beautiful, so moving, and I would listen to it over and over and over and over again because I have a slightly obsessive personality. And I loved it. I just loved it dearly. It was one of the things that made me say, you know what, I really do want to be a horn player. That was one of the moments that kind of brought me away from piano playing or composing music, and just made me focus on horn. And when I won my job at New York City Ballet, the very first ballet that I played with them was Midsummer Night's Dream. So that was very meaningful for me.
Nice. All right. This is the time in the interview we have to ask you.
Uh-oh.
Give us your best dog bark.
Do they want to know the story behind this, or should I just bark?
Give us your best dog bark first, and then you can
Okay.
tell the story, because I think they would also appreciate the story.
Sure.
We're all clapping for you. You want to tell that story?
So yeah, the first time I subbed with New Jersey Symphony, it was probably around 2015 or so, and I had just moved to New York for different reasons, and I took a lesson with the principal horn of Jersey Symphony, and he liked my playing, so he invited me to come in and sub. So I walk in the building ready to play the first rehearsal. I don't know anyone in the orchestra at this point, and the principal horn wasn't there. So someone else in the section had moved up to play principal, and I was filling in for them on third horn. So I walk in, I introduce myself, and I'm sitting there quietly and politely and, doing some things to warm up. I start looking through the music. It's a couple minutes before they start the rehearsal. And it was a piece by Walter Piston that was a suite from a ballet, funnily enough. And in the actual ballet, well, I'll tell this part later, but I was looking through the music, and the third horn basically had 30 something rests until there was a grand pause. And then someone wrote in my music, "Bark like a vicious dog." So I'm thinking to myself, okay, they're starting rehearsal. Does anybody else have this in their part? Is this a hazing experiment for new subs with the New Jersey Symphony? Am I going to embarrass myself? So I start looking at the other horn players' parts, and they're like taken aback because they're already playing at this point. They don't have rests, so they're seeing me look over their shoulder at their parts and kind of looking at me like, "What are you doing, dude?" And so they don't have anything in their music. I like look up at the rows of woodwind players in front of me. They don't have anything in their music. At this point, I have 8 measures to make a decision. Do I go big or go home? And we're in NJ Pack in Newark. It's a pretty big concert hall. And again, I don't know anyone in the orchestra. So, now I have, 2 measures of rest, and I'm thinking, well, here we go. And so we come to the grand pause. The conductor cuts off the orchestra, and nothing is happening. And I look around, and I go, and it took about 3 minutes for the orchestra to compose themselves. Half the string players had dropped their instruments. The conductor was bent over the podium, laughing hysterically. And so, orchestra quiets down, and I'm sitting there beet red, but a little angelic face, just looking around. And the horn players are very confused. Um, and so the conductor gets back on the podium and he says, "You, what's your name?" And I said, "It's in the part. I didn't." He's like, "Shh, shh, shh, shh. What's your name?" And so I said, I'm Dan. He's like, "Dan, I want you to do that at every concert." And so what happened is, in the ballet that this is from, at this grand pause, there are huge German Shepherd dogs that are supposed to run out on stage and bark and growl viciously, and they're trained to do this. But it's not written into the ballet suite where there's just an orchestra and no dancers on stage. So someone wrote it in for some reason in the third horn part. Um, so he explained this to the orchestra and everyone got it. And I became known as the dog barking guy from then on. And the principal horn, who wasn't there at the time, called me a week later and he said, "Hey, Dan, I've been hearing things about you." And I said, "Oh, really? What did you hear, Chris?" He said, "Well, everyone's saying this new kid, he's a good player, but you got to hear him bark." So I was forever from then on out known as the vicious dog barking guy.
Nice. I love that story. Since we are on the same track of talking about lots of ballet shows, I'm sure everybody in this Zoom chat knows the Nutcracker. Yes, yes, we all know the Sugar Plum Fairies. We know the Toy Soldier March. So we know Nutcracker very well. Now, here's a fun fact about Dan. Dan is vegan and he doesn't eat meat or any type of dairy. So I came up with a very mean, some might say mean question. Some might say a very difficult question. But my question for you is, because Dan has played obviously many ballets and many, many nutcrackers around Christmas time every year in December. I hear from Dan and he's just like, I just finished playing another nutcracker. If I never hear nutcracker again, it'll be too soon. So the next question for you, Dan.
Uh-oh.
Would you rather play nutcracker right now during quarantine, or would you rather eat 3 Philly cheesesteaks in one sitting?
Okay, so this is a hard question because you're saying in quarantine when I haven't been able to make music with anyone for months. So I'm pretty well starved.
But are you so starved?
No, well, what I would say normally would be hands down cheesesteaks. But during quarantine, I would go with Nutcracker.
So what if it's not during quarantine? What if it's just Christmas in July and we're playing Nutcracker during July?
I would hurt people.
You would rather have 3 Philly cheesesteaks?
Yes. I would rather
You'd rather make yourself sick?
10 Philly cheesesteaks, yes.
Wow. All right. All right. Well, now that we're talking about fun quarantine things, I'm going to play your video, but Dan, would you like to give it a little backstory?
Sure. Yeah, so the video that you're about to hear, I've been, this first year at New York City Ballet has been very stressful. I'm trying to make a good impression and trying to earn tenure, so I have some stability there. So when quarantine first happened, I had come back from the college that I went to, giving a master class, and I landed ready to do a week of performances in Philadelphia, and my phone blew up and everything was canceled. And so I just went home and went to bed and never got up because I was so exhausted from such a rigorous schedule. So I really didn't touch my horn for a while, probably for a couple of weeks, which is a while for me. And then around Mother's Day, my mother got sick and went to the hospital. Luckily, it was not COVID, but she was in Florida, and there was no way for me to get in touch with her or get updates or be able to see her. So I was really freaking out for a bit. And so basically, I made an arrangement of a song that she used to sing to me when I was a kid for six horns. Um, and then I recorded each of the parts and uh, and videotaped myself playing it and posted it on YouTube. And that was her Mother's Day gift. And luckily, she was fine and appreciated the video. And then the video went um, somewhat viral in some music communities. And so, yeah, that's what your teacher is going to play.
Beautiful. Dan, can you tell us what? So I know you arranged that yourself. I don't think some of us know what arranging is. Can you explain that?
Sure. Well, there's transcriptions and there are arrangements. A transcription is when you basically take something that's already written and literally just write it in the keys of other instruments. An arrangement can doesn't have to be, but can be more creative. So what I did here was I took the basic theme of "You Are My Sunshine" and I wanted to give my mom something that would mean something to her, but then shock her. Like that middle section, you don't necessarily expect that to happen. So I wanted to make something that was a little bit more creative and varied in the type of emotion that it would provoke. And so I took a lot of liberties in terms of the organization of the different themes and which themes might have the melodies. Something that's really a really useful composition or arranging tool is to take a melody that would typically be played in the upper register or in a more vocal register, and then have that melody in a lower instrument. I mean, you guys are string players, so you experience this a lot. When the cello or the bass has a line, a melodic line, that's not how things are typically structured. So when it happens, you want to make the most of it. And the 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 arranging techniques used to make that interesting are really cool. So I love exploring those.
I want you to know the chat box is just blowing up with them saying how cool and amazing that was, your video.
I'm glad you guys enjoyed it.
So in your video, I noticed that you had many hats.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Can you show us a hat? All right, new rule. Every single time. Oh my goodness. How come that wasn't in your video?
I have too many hats to select from.
Yeah, but you could have definitely gotten rid of some of the other hats and wore that one instead.
Yeah, but I didn't want the hats to be the feature.
Well, they are the feature of. No. You have to keep it on. All right, new rule. You ready? I'm going to ask anytime during the interview, I'm just going to scream hat, and you got to change to a different hat.
Okay.
Okay, so you're just going to be a samurai for a little bit now.
Okay.
You can get your hats ready if you want. Cool.
I forgot
All right.
my bee antenna. Oh well.
Oh, that was my favorite. I was hoping for that one. Anyways, I'll wear a hat too. If everybody has seen this one.
It my bee antenna.
Oh, okay. This is I wear this during lessons. My kids know this because they've seen this. He's not the happy one right now, but you'll see. He changes. Sometimes he turns happy. Okay, so our next question. We've been asking this for every speaker so far. I've answered this question. We had some other speakers answer this question, but none of the other speakers do what you do. So the question is, how often do you practice and for how long?
There's there is a very famous trumpet player that answered this in an interview way before I was born. This trumpet player's name was Adolf Herseth. He went by Bud Herseth, and he was the principal trumpet of the Chicago Symphony for like 50 years. He's a legend in the brass world. And a reporter once asked him this: how often do you practice, and what happens if you don't practice for a day? And so his answer to this was, well, I practice every day. And I'll modify that for myself. But he said, I'll practice every day. And if I don't play for one day, I notice. If I don't play for 2 days, my colleagues notice. If I don't play for 3 days, you notice. And I always thought that was funny, but once you get a job where you are in the spotlight in a high pressure seat day after day, it gives you a different perspective than when you're trying to win an audition, or when you're freelancing, or when you're a student. There's a point at which you realize what's on the line, and you realize how high your standards have gotten, and that there's a certain amount of practicing required for maintenance of basic technique, and then there's kind of like the next level that keeps you exceptional in the eyes of other people. And my job now is to remain exceptional whenever I'm performing in public. That's a lot of pressure. And so the nice thing about quarantine for me is I can relax that a bit. But, when I was playing this year in the ballet, I might have 2 services a day, a rehearsal in the morning and a concert at night, or 2 concerts a day, sometimes 1 service a day, and then Mondays we would have off. So basically my routine would be to get to the hall an hour and a half before rehearsal, and I would warm up and do basic exercises for an hour, then take a break, play rehearsal, go out to lunch, relax, warm up for another half an hour before the evening concert. After the concert, I would practice for another 2 hours after that.
So Laura Lee just screamed, "Ha!" Okay, keep going.
Okay. And it's funny, like what I practice now is very different than what I was practicing before. And I think the main thing that you have to realize at a certain point is practicing is not generically equal. Like it has to be intentional and purposeful, and you can practice intelligently in a way that allows you to get more accomplished in a shorter period of time. There's certain types of practice which you just have to put the time in to build your endurance and build your strength up. And then there are other types of practice that allow you to save a whole bunch of time. If you're playing in an ensemble regularly, whether that's a chamber ensemble or playing a lot of solo repertoire, or playing in an orchestra, you know, 9 times out of 10, endurance is not the main thing you have to work on because you're constantly playing. So, whereas during quarantine, endurance is the primary thing that I need to work on now. So, understanding what the demands of your schedule offer you and where you need to compensate for that. So, if on the most basic level as a horn player, if I'm constantly playing principal horn and always playing high, then a lot of my warm up and a lot of my practice is spent in the low range to balance that. So things like that, like figuring out, and this is kind of like a life lesson too, figuring out where you're already putting in effort in different contexts and what you can do to balance those things to keep like everything kind of in line and supporting each other.
On that note, hat. It's probably my favorite one you wear over during Christmas. Okay, so if you could have one superpower, what would it be?
Um, if okay, so there's the dream answer, which is pretty common, and then there's the creative answer, which is not as common.
Both, go.
Okay, so the dream answer, I would love to fly. And part of that is, it obviously has appeal, but the other part of that is I'm mildly afraid of heights. And I tend to, when I'm afraid of something, I tend to want to do it more until I'm no longer afraid of it. Um, and then the creative answer is I would like to be able to squirt random condiments out of my belly button at people.
Ew. Like you just want to squirt ketchup out of your
I,
belly button?
yep.
Ew.
I don't
I
even
want
like
you,
ketchup.
like, I hope you can, like, see some people's reactions right now
Oh,
because they're worse than
I
mine.
totally can. It only makes me want to do it more.
Okay. Well, speaking about superpowers, you kind of have one. And actually, there's some people in
Do I?
this, and you do. Well, I call it a superpower. You might not call it a superpower. And some people, some of my students I know actually have this, and they might not realize this, that they have the
Hmm.
superpower, which is perfect pitch.
Uh,
But before we talk about perfect pitch, hat. Oh, that's just boring. All right. Well, all right. That's less boring. All right. So, can you explain what perfect pitch is, if you have it, and how do you cope with it?
it's funny. My perspective on this has changed drastically over the years. When I was young,
Wait, can you
I
explain what it is first? Some of us
yes.
don't know
So
what that is.
perfect pitch is the ability to memorize what pitches sound like and be able to largely be able to reproduce them. So without any other assistance. So relative pitch is the ability to maybe hear one or two pitches memorized, or be able to uh, replicate pitches through intervals. So if you play me a C, then I can sing you an E because I know what a third sounds like. That's relative pitch, knowing what an interval sounds like, knowing how pitches relate to each other. Most people develop that. Perfect pitch is the memorization of all keys. So if I said to you, picture what red looks like, or show me red on a computer screen, like you can find it, you can relay that, and you know what it looks like before you even see it. with perfect pitch, I know what an E sounds like before anyone plays it. I know what an F sharp sounds like. I know what every pitch under the sun sounds like. And I can tell you the difference between a 440 and a 442. There are degrees of perfect pitch. And I think that the label of perfect is misleading because we're all human and we can all be skewed. The people with the best ears in the world, if they were stuck on a deserted island for a year, not having any music or any guidelines, their pitch would change very gradually because they wouldn't be constantly reinforcing it with consistent playing of music. So that's what perfect pitch is. Now, when I was younger, I discovered I had perfect pitch because I started playing piano by ear when I was very young. And I think it was in middle school that a music teacher first told me I had perfect pitch. I think my mom knew, but we never really talked about it. And so the band director in middle school knew I had perfect pitch, and he kind of announced it to people. So that was my worst nightmare, because then all of the boys in my band would come up to me and burp in my face and ask me to tell them what pitch it was. So that was fun. I think I thought of perfect pitch at the time as something you were born with and something that would never go away, and something that you couldn't develop. My perspective on it now is that you can learn to memorize pitches. Anyone can learn to memorize pitches as long as you are in touch with your learning languages, how you best assimilate information. You can learn with consistent practice. I don't know that it's always useful, but you can learn. And there's a difference between being annoyed by something and being able to recognize something. So I used to wear perfect pitch as kind of an arrogant badge of honor. And if someone would play out of tune, I would always react to it. And, you know, when I would listen to music from the 1700s played on instruments from the 17 and 1800s that was pitched in a different key, I would always make a face and show people that I knew it was off. But the reality is, you know, what we know of as pitch is regulated and determined and defined by modern instruments. It is not defined by the existence of pitch. Every time you hear a car horn on the street and the Doppler effect of the pitch changing as it drives down the street, you know, if out of tuneness, a lot of people with perfect pitch will react to something being out of tune. But if out of tuneness really bothered you, then anytime you heard a subway or a train or the leaves blowing on trees, all of these things would bother you because they're not perfectly homogeneous consonants. They're not perfect major triads. So there's this attachment that's kind of like a faux pas to talk about, to perfect pitch being painful to have or difficult to have. And it's an asset as long as you can also develop relative pitch as well. I know plenty of people with perfect pitch that have trouble tuning because what you hear of, let's say you have a C, an E, and a G, a C major triad. What you hear as a C or what you hear as an E has to change to tune a major triad. You have to play the third at least 15 cents flat in order for it to be in tune in a major triad. For someone with perfect pitch who wears it as a badge of honor, they're like, no, I'm right. But the reality is, if you're not playing with relative pitch, it's a hindrance. So
everybody is screaming hat at me right now in the chat room. Ooh, that's fancy. So thank you. Did you have anything more you want to say about that one?
No, I think I was ranting long enough. Does anyone have like a follow-up question about perfect pitch?
Since we're at that 45-minute mark, you guys know the drill. Go ahead, type in questions and I'll try to ask him. Dan, I have two more questions. Well, I have three more questions. One, everybody knows what that one question is, but I'm going to save it. The first one, very quickly, body awareness. Can you tell us about that? Because I have a feeling a lot of us are like, for the violin players, they're like, I'm tired of holding up my instrument. I have pain, all of that stuff. Can
Sure.
you just briefly talk to us about that?
So it's funny, like I music and sports have gone hand in hand for me for a long time. I've always been a competitive athlete and a musician. And then my dad got sick after college, and I learned a lot about nutrition and alternative medicine and body posture and all of these things. And so it's like I learned all of these things from in different contexts. And as I became a better musician, realized that they all had, um, they were all, they could all relate to each other and be integrated. So as a musician, there are two things that I have learned to be very, very helpful. One is being more aware of what you put in your body. For instance, as string players, when you give a performance, you're not as sensitive to something like dry mouth. Um, when a lot of people get up to speak, their mouth gets really dry. Or if you play a wind instrument, your mouth gets really dry. If you play a wind or brass instrument, game over. Your response is completely different. As a string player, you're probably dealing a bit more with aches and pains, or with the stability of your bowing arm, being able to hold that steady when you're really nervous. So knowing that different things that you eat might actually affect that. I'm not going to go into that in huge detail here, but if you're interested in that, if you have trouble staying relaxed when you're performing, then posture and breathing, but also nutrition can be something to look into, because I can have two different meals, and one meal will keep me super calm and super relaxed in performance, and the other meal will have me completely and utterly terrified on stage. And the most obvious example of that is people who drink a lot of coffee and have a lot of caffeine in their diet. When they go to perform, they often get the shakes or they're very unsettled. So just touching on that, as you get older, and you have opportunities to research this more and become aware, just know that it can have a profound effect. With regard to the physiology, aches and pains there are two things that you can do to address them. There are two things that you can do to address the physiology of performing with your instrument. One is posture and balance. We talked a little bit about my practice routine, balancing out my daily routine. So whatever I'm doing on my horn, I have to balance in my practice session with things that I'm not addressing in my daily habits. The same goes for working out as an athlete or working out as a musician. If you are spending hours and hours a day in one posture, knowing what muscles you're using is really important, and being able to balance that posture with a workout or stretching routine before or after, that is really important. So for me with horn, I spend hours and hours a day holding a 10-pound instrument out in front of me like this. These muscles, they're super strong, but I need to often keep in mind that I have to work out my upper back or stretch these muscles to have a supportively strong body, so that will allow me to continue holding an instrument in front of me. So I think it's very often that, if you have a pain somewhere, I think everyone's first instinct is to stretch. And that is super important. And doing things like yoga and just holding a stretch and breathing into it, very important. And I highly recommend that you do that. But also getting into fitness to a certain degree, what I call diagnostic fitness, and learning to strengthen the muscles that support the muscles that you're using to play your instrument, equally important. And then the
Dan,
last part, yes.
sorry, they're screaming at me in the chat room. Hat. They're screaming hat. But go ahead and explain your last third thing really super quick.
And the third thing is breathing. Right? Oxygen is some of our most important fuel, right, if we're not getting enough of it. So my first instrument, as I said before, was piano. And my first job was playing cocktail piano. I used to play piano in Nordstrom department stores. And I would play for anywhere from 6 to 12 hours a day. And, at the time, I didn't really understand what good practice habits were. So I was getting more and more tense. And to play piano, I didn't really feel like I had to breathe. So, when I go back and play piano now, given what I've learned from horn playing, it's a very different experience and I can play for a lot longer. But, you play piano for that long, even when you're young, and you're not moving and you're not really breathing, you start to get more and more tense. And eventually you just get injured. And so there was one summer that I had bilateral tendonitis in both arms, and I was in high school. Like, it wasn't like I was old or anything. So what I found was making sure that my sits bones, my waist are a little bit more loose. There's a technique called Alexander technique, which talks a lot about posture. And one of the founding notions of Alexander technique is to kind of, do all of you know what a Dyson vacuum cleaner looks like? If you've ever seen one, if you haven't seen one, Google it. There's kind of this like ball that allows for an extreme rotation and change of direction in the vacuum cleaner. And that was kind of a big thing when Dyson vacuum cleaners came out. I always like to think that everything in my upper body is kind of pivoting and balancing on this ball. And one of the things that I do in my warm up, if I'm standing, if I'm standing or sitting, so I'm envisioning this ball and I'm making sure that I can keep my knees, that I'm sitting in a chair that allows me to keep my knees lower than my waist. Sometimes I might have to cross my legs to do that, like cross my feet, and sit on the edge of the chair. Other times the chair is tall enough, or I have a wedge that I can sit on. And whether I'm seated or standing, one of the things I do in my warm up is I will move. I will move more than I have to. I will move more than I ever would in performance, because I would probably make people dizzy. But I'll hold my horn and I'll play while like rocking back and forth, just to keep all of my core muscles and everything that I use for alignment loose and flexible. Because when we get nervous or when we get focused, like hyper focused on an activity, we tend to neglect other parts of our body. So we stay too still. And keeping the muscles that we don't think we're using while we're playing our instrument, keeping those muscles loose and active and fluid is super important for avoiding injury. So you have the alignment factor, but the thing that really complements the alignment factor is how we breathe. Now, as a brass player or a wind player, breathing is, we have to work on that. That's like you working on your bow arm. But what my experience on piano is that I can play so much longer if I breathe with the music, if I breathe into each phrase. So taking a deep breath, filling your lower back and your sides, not just your stomach, not just your chest or your shoulders, breathing down and around and out in every direction, slowly. Every breath like a yawn, every breath expanding parts of your body where you might feel pain, parts of your body where you feel stiff. Having this awareness and kind of integrating it with how you're trying to phrase is super important. And the earlier you kind of get into that habit and start to build that awareness, I think the more ease and success you'll have and the more expressive you'll be able to be on your instrument.
So the next 5 minutes are speed round questions. So 10 words or less. You ready?
Okay.
I don't know if you know them. I think you do. But what are your thoughts on two-set violin?
What?
Two-set. Do you know two-set? Two-set
I don't.
violin? I will send you
Yeah.
their stuff later, and then I'll let everybody else know what your thoughts are on there.
Okay.
What is your opinion on violas?
Where's my match?
Oh no, you want to light it on fire?
No, I
10,
wouldn't light it on fire. Actually,
10 words or less.
10 words or less. I love the sound of a viola. I love the sound of a viola. I'll leave it at that.
Good answer. Do you like memes?
I love memes.
Okay. The question was, do you know what memes are and what do you like them? But I knew you knew what they were.
Okay.
How many auditions do you think you've had?
Oh boy.
Too many.
Too many. Probably between 30 and 40.
Do you still get nervous?
Absolutely.
Okay, this is the question everybody's been waiting for. I always wait for the last minute for this question. Would you rather fight one horse-sized duck or 100 duck-sized horses?
One horse-sized duck.
Great answer. That's been the consistent. That's been the consistent answer. What's your favorite ice cream flavor? Vegan or not vegan?
Vegan. Vegan cookies and cream.
Who's your favorite composer?
No, wait, vegan caramel cookies and cream. Favorite composer. This is tough. I like balance and I like variety, so it's hard to pick favorites. But I will say Gustav Mahler.
What's your favorite color?
Green.
How do you motivate yourself to practice?
10
words or less. This is hard.
I remember my failures, and then I'm terrified.
Ooh, that's a good one. Guys, last minute questions. Go, go, go. Let's see. Anybody else? Questions? What's your middle name?
Mark, M-A-R-C, Mark.
Mark with a C?
Yes.
Daniel Mark Wions, everyone.
Daniel Mark Wions.
Let's give him a round of applause. That's it. All right. Oh, wait, last one. What's your favorite kind of dog?
Oh, any dog that is playful.
There you go. What's the grossest thing that has happened in ballet?
The grossest thing that has happened in ballet?
Yep. Let's keep it PG here.
Okay. If you ever look at ballet slippers, that's all I'm going to say. They are disgusting.
Okay, guys. All right. So next week, tune in again. I feel like a YouTuber. I just feel so famous sometimes. Next week, we're going to have my friend Michael. He's actually going to talk about composers, like minority composers and women composers who are underrepresented in the music world. So tune again next Tuesday. If you have any other questions for Dan, feel free to email us and then we can get it in touch, show that to you. You can just Google the, not Google, you can YouTube and Dan Wions, You Are My Sunshine video, and you guys can watch that again and share it and like it and rewatch it and comment it. And I think he has a new one out, right?
I do have a new one out, yeah.
Oh, so you guys can just check him. And then just make him YouTube famous for us, guys. All right. In the meantime, I pinky promise to you guys as a string player, I'm going to show him who two-set violin is. Because I know you guys are a little bummed that he didn't know. I'm a little bummed that he didn't know who they were. Come on, Dan. All right, guys.
I've been a little preoccupied.
You're going to get even more preoccupied when we shoot you down that rabbit hole of two-set.
Oh, boy.
All right, guys. Bye. Thank you.
Подключи друг молодежь.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.